Okay, so hello everyone. We are looking at chapter 6 for the history topic, and we are looking at the reasons for end of World War II in Europe. Okay, and remember what I've always mentioned in class is we always take a look at our syllabus document, which is from the SEAB website, and you can check what is it that specifically you need to study. Okay, so things like, for example, what is expected for you to learn. So things like reasons for end of World War II. All right, predominantly is just two factors, strength of the allies as well as military weakness of Germany and Japan. Okay, so these are the two main points. However, under strength of the allies, there are three sub-points. There are three bulleted points here that actually mean that you need to know the examples. So same thing with the military weakness of Germany and Japan. You need to know Germany's military weakness. You need to know Japan's military weakness. Now, if you take a look at the note section, you would see that, all right, while you do not need to know the detailed study of the military campaigns, I think it's very important, as mentioned in class, that you need to take a look at the major turning points of the war. I think this is the one that is quite crucial. Okay, so in this particular picture, you can see, right, and you can observe specifically the different flags, right? You have the German flag, you have the Japanese flag, you also have the Italian flag, right? So what do these flags represent? These flags actually represent a few things. It represents the Axis power. Okay, and in World War II, they were actually fighting the Allied powers, right? UK, Soviet Union, and USA. So take note, Soviet Union was actually part of an alliance with the Germans, right? We talk about the Nazi-Soviet pact, non-aggression pact in class, all right? So what happened? How did Soviet Union sort of had a turning point? So these are things that is good for you to remember. So as I mentioned just now, all right, under reasons for the end of World War II, it is being divided into strength of the Allies as well as military weakness of Germany and Japan. And under strength of the Allies, there are subpoints: USA entry, Allied strategies, and the role of Soviet Union. Whereas military weakness, all right, it is about ineffective command structure in Germany, and the very fact that Germany had to fight on two fronts, whereas for Japan, it is about the overextension and no access to raw materials. So always remember, these are all the factors, but when you link back, you must always ask yourself, how do these factors actually contribute to the reasons for the end of World War II? So now we are looking at the first reason under strength of the allies. We are looking at USA's entry into the war. And we obviously know that USA was practicing a period of isolation. So when and how did USA enter specifically World War II? So USA entered the war specifically um, during the time where it was really of great importance. Okay, I wouldn't say that USA was not involved in the war. They did give loans to the allies. Right, they did try to sanctions or to stop the Japanese from fighting in China. Okay, but eventually it was only after the Pearl Harbor incident in 1941 that America officially entered into the war. So you can see from this newspaper article, the Japanese planes were actually bombing Pearl Harbor. Now, once America entered the war, what happens next? Okay, you can see from point 1, 2, 3, all these are examples of how America, given its massive strength, and they were the last country that sort of entered the World War II, in fact. They were able to rebuild the fleet, the ships. They were able to actually have more weapons than what Germany and Japan combined. Okay, and this helped them in helping uh, countries, specifically China, to fight against Japan. They also ensured, in your textbook, they actually wrote about the Atlantic Ocean. All right, the control of the Atlantic Ocean is very important because it is where the goods are transferred. And Germany that time used U-boats. So U-boats are actually submarines, and USA, given its massive strength, literally increased more ships, and the very fact that the German couldn't keep up. So all these were examples, and the main example really is to tell you that USA had a lot of weapons and they had a lot of manpower sort of to spare, to the extent that it contributed to the strength of the Allies. Okay, so these are some examples. You can see very carefully what happened in Pearl Harbor. And when America sort of entered the war, you can see these are all the planes, and you can see that the military construction, especially, look at the year, okay, increase or spike. More examples of ammunition. And this is what I meant when USA supplied the Kuomintang in China with huge amount of money. So you can see that Japan was trying to occupy parts or most parts of the Chinese Empire, and a lot of these weapons were sort of given or were sort of loaned, specifically uh, by the Americans to countries that was fighting, whether it was Germany or they were fighting Japan. Okay, and lastly, this was what I meant, all right, to actually send a lot of the resources to Europe. Okay, they needed to make sure that the sea, or the Atlantic Sea, is actually a safe space, and they did it, or the Americans did it, by producing a lot more warships such that the Germany could not keep up. So a pictorial sort of check-in, all right, strength of the allies, with the USA entering the war, with them producing enough weapons. It led to the end of World War II. How? Okay, was the game over specifically for Germany? Okay, so you see the link, American entry led to the end of World War II because of what? Their capacity, their strength. Okay, and USA had the upper hand in terms of sheer number of manpower, and both Germany and Japan could not keep up, and it led to their eventual defeat. Okay, so for our next point under strength of the allies, we're going to look at allied strategies. Okay, so under allied strategies, there are four examples. Okay, so what do I mean by allied strategies? Allied strategies meant really quick, decisive factors that literally turn the tide of the war. That means they are strategies that are quick thinking, methods. And because of this, it actually led to both Germany as well as Japan suffering losses. Okay, so one of the examples is definitely D-Day. All right, D-Day is very important because it signal, or it sorts of turned the tide against the Germans. Okay, and of course the Americans as well as the British, they tried to land near Normandy, France, because at that time France was already being conquered by Germany. And from Normandy, they tried to actually enter more land in France, and they tried to take over the area slowly into Germany. Okay, Obviously, we know that survival of the British or Britain was very crucial. Okay, for reason because definitely, if you remember, Britain is the only country that sort of not being conquered by Germany, right? Even though, yes, the British did suffer a lot from the bombing, but they survived. And with the British survival, at least, America could use Britain as a landing point to infiltrate or go into France and then later on Germany. Okay, we talk about island hopping strategies. Okay, the jump and block method, we talk about it, right? Okay, and of course the atomic bomb. So let's go into details. All right, so for this, you could actually see that, it is very important that Britain continues to, for example, even despite all the bombing here, to survive, because again, it is a good allied power, specifically to America. Okay, all right, more pictures of Britain, not Japan, sorry, of Britain being bombed during World War II. Of course, you've got the late Queen, all right, who was actually a mechanic during World War II. Okay, and then you have some pictures here. All right. Now moving on to what is island hopping strategies. So island hopping strategies, if you look very carefully, Japan literally, okay, conquered all these countries. So you can see that this line literally meant areas under Japanese control all the way until 1942. And a lot of it is actually islands, small, small little islands. So one of the allied strategies, right? Remember, allied strategies is to actually not straight away conquer the mainland Japan, but to actually make sure that all these islands or all these countries are actually given the freedom first. Okay, so they actually try to isolate Japan held areas. So when I say about Japan held areas are all these islands, okay, and they capture weaker islands, that means the allied powers, right? Mostly American and could even be some of the locals and Australians. They cut ships that carry resources, because once you stop the ships from entering here, because all these are the resource areas, right? Resource rich, right? Whether it is natural materials, whether it's even manpower, anything. And if the allied power as one of their strategies stops them from going to Japan, and Japan will suffer because not enough resources. So here is another map that actually shows you all the different island hopping. So there's a lot, and these are some of the major battles here. The Coral Sea battle is one of the most popular one, okay, that you can remember, the one in Guam. Okay, so a lot of island hopping before they entered literally very near Japan. And of course, enough said, we talk a lot about the atomic bomb. The use of bomb especially sort of caused the end of World War II, because it was unfortunate that the bombs caused a lot of damage as well as devastation, and it led to Japanese defeat eventually. Okay, so if we were to sort of I would say summarize it, okay? The Allied strategies is definitely to ensure that Britain survived. Okay, we talk about island hopping. We talk about D-Day itself as one of the strategy, and of course the use of atomic bomb, and eventually all these factors led to the end of World War II. Okay, so we've talked about the first link. Okay, so allied strategies, how do you write the link? Because that is the one that's most important. Okay, they came with good strategies that stopped both Germany and Japan in their tracks. D-Day and using Britain as a base Why? To infiltrate German and weaken its defense. So we use words such as to infiltrate. Okay, the island, sorry, hopping strategies is really to stop Japan from having resources. And once you don't have resources, you cannot go to war. You are limited, right? And of course, I think the atomic bomb was a turning point, and it was a good strategy to demand complete surrender of Japan. So this is how you link. Remember, linking is very important. While you remember examples, but you need to make sure that you link properly. Now, moving to the last example of strength of allies is, of course, the role of Soviet Union. Okay, this is Soviet Union. Soviet Union is big, all right. Strong, yes. Okay, remember this was Poland. This is the Germany, and Germany literally. You can look at the Nazi. I think this is a very good map. It actually tells you specifically where was Nazi German areas under German occupation. So all this, and these are some of the neutral countries. Okay, now role of Soviet Union. So why is it when Soviet Union entered or Soviet Union changed sides, how did it lead to the defeat of Germany and even Japan? Okay, so first things first, they're strong enough, they're big enough, and they were able to prevent Germany from complete control of Eastern Europe. So when I say Eastern Europe, I'm talking about this area here. Okay, they do a few things, this Soviet Union. They reorganized and they resisted. They had resources, they increased production. So things like, for example, using very heavy duty tanks, it increases the discipline of soldiers. I was sharing with you about the not a step back policy. I think that's very good to quote in your examples. Or how? What is the meaning of reorganize? What's the meaning of resistance? Is having strategy such that, okay, you as a Soviet soldier, you cannot step back. And when you cannot step back means you cannot surrender. You cannot surrender means that you have to give all out. Now, it doesn't help that Soviet Union also has this factor. Okay, what is this factor? They force people to make weapons. They even ensure that, everyone else who's not at the war front, they still need to contribute to war effort. It sounds very horrible, yes, but it allowed Soviet Union to actually produce more weapons versus Germany, and it allowed their industrial factories to move away because Germany was attacking Soviet Union already. All right, because obviously they want Poland. I mean, German as well as Soviet Union, they were never friends to begin with. Okay, so as German entered Soviet Union here, the whole idea is all the military factories here was being moved even further. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, this was what I meant. All these tanks, okay, very, very good tanks that was being used in war. And of course, here is a not one step back policy. So very interesting that they literally used force to stop the Germans. Now, how did Soviet Union then being involved in World War II, how did they stop the Japanese Empire? So you can see Soviet Union goes from all the way Europe and all the way to Southeast Asia. Manchuria was part of Japan Empire. See, orange, 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 orange. Correct? Can you see? Now, red color are communists here. They were trying to stop the Japanese, but you see, not strong enough. But you have this purple color country, which is literally Soviet Union. And once in the midst of war, as they have managed to subdue or stop Germany, and once Soviet Union actually enters Manchuria here, you can just imagine, right? I enter Manchuria here with all my forces here, and this is all Japanese empire. The Japanese would eventually, surrender. Because how am I supposed to bid, or how am I supposed to fight the allied power who's doing all that island hopping strategy, and at the same time I am actually resisting all these communist people, all these Chinese people, and at the same time also Soviet Union? It is a lose-lose situation. So we have gone through strength of the allies, and the third one, which is the role of Soviet Union, is all of this. That means, Stalin's leadership uh, capabilities, and then you also have the tanks that they used. And when Soviet declares war on Japan, this is what it means. It literally means the end of World War II. So look at the link. Okay, their resources proved useful once the Germans had to fight a two-front war, which is both Allied power as well as Soviet Union. It was very hard for the Germans to actually lose. And when Soviet entered Asia Pacific, it proved useful to stop Japan as Soviet invaded Manchuria and pressured Japan to surrender. Okay, so now we are done with the strength of the Allies. Again, going through reasons for the end of World War II, there are two major reasons: strength of allies as well as military weakness. So now we are going into military weakness. Okay, so remember, the opposite of strength of allies will always be military weakness of both German as well as Japan. So under Germany, one of the most ineffective command structure was really about Hitler's mistakes. Okay, I think in this video, which I will tag later, you can see that German commanders actually constantly had to report to him. And Hitler, while he was a good speaker, he was actually very ill qualified. That means not good enough to actually make very high level military decisions. And it doesn't help that he was actually very suspicious of his commanders. Okay, these are some examples where it actually shows that Hitler did not make the right decision, whether it was at Dunkirk, whether it was at Stalingrad, whether it is even to declare war with USA. Okay, and in this video, it talks a little bit about Steiner. Right, this was in the last phase of his control, I would say. Okay, and this all resulted in ineffective command structure. So if your leader is ineffective, you obviously know that it is not good enough. So when it's not good enough, eventually it will lead to the defeat. So this is what I meant in terms of the last bits of decision making. Okay, you can see these are all the American forces, Soviet forces. So it was really hard, I think, for Hitler to make good, sound decisions when you're under in a lot of this stress, right? Okay, so this was before definitely D-Day, and one of the examples that you can even get in your textbook is really this Operation Dynamo. Okay, it is the evacuation of British as well as French soldiers. And in Dunkirk itself, you can take a look. All right, these purple colors are all, Allied forces. All right, Allied forces. And if you follow the timeline, look at the timeline. Okay, in May 25th, all these um, black color lines are actually the Germans, and PZ division is actually all tanker division, very heavy duty, and they sort of stopped. Okay, and then they tried to go again, and then again they stopped, and such that on May 31st, you can see that there are a good sort of stronghold of these Allied powers right at Dunkirk, while a lot of these soldiers were actually trying to go into Britain. That means they are evacuating. So let's see why. And one of the many reasons why, unfortunately, for Hitler, why Hitler didn't want to just, surround them and sort of kill them is because um, Hitler said that he gave Churchill a sporting chance of survival. All right, I will give you this link. Take a look at this link. So it's quite interesting where you realize that Hitler may not be quite smart or quite clever. All right. Well, I mean, it's obvious, right? Just you could just go for the kill. That means go and stop all this British army, but they did not. So was it just because he wanted to give a sporting chance? Means just a chance, huh? Okay. So not very smart of Hitler. Um, Same thing. Okay. All these things are actually some examples to show. The next point. which is actually the war on two fronts. Okay, so if you look very carefully, the war on two fronts, just not specifically the map, all right? Imagine having being invaded in two fronts. It is actually very, very hard for Hitler to continue to sustain. I think that's the good word, to sustain. Okay. Of course, on the part of Germany, there was also poor planning. Okay, so while you have huge, I would say huge battleships, huge battleships, it is it pales in comparison to specifically later on you'll see the American aircraft carriers. So what are aircraft carriers? Aircraft carriers are battleships also, a bit slower definitely compared to these giant battleships, but they have aircrafts on it, which makes it advantages. Okay, and even later on, we'll see all these examples. Okay, so you see just now that picture, and then you see these are Americans aircraft carrier. They have a ship, and they have lots and lots and lots of these aircrafts. So obviously, who has the upper hand? Definitely the Allied power, and because the Allied power is so good, it's the strength of the Allied strategies. It is the weakness of the Germans. Okay, so imagine this one on the bottom here is German, and then you can see these are the American planes. And you look at the wingspan, and you look at the propeller, and you look at just imagine how many weapons can a smaller, yes, it is definitely very fast German plane versus an American plane. It is fast, but can they bring enough firepower? That's another question. Then moving on, one of the most important things is this. Okay, what is one great invention that actually brings a distinct and significant role in the outcome of such a pivotal war? And you see, how come women are involved, right? It is actually the radar. All right, it's our modern day GPS, and these are some of radar stations, right? And the whole idea is to be able to actually detect where the warships or where the signals is coming from. And at that time, unfortunately, the Germans were not able to use this technology very well in comparison to Britain as well as America. Okay, now for Japan, what were their mistakes? So two mistakes or two weakness that they had was overextension of empire and the inability to access raw materials from empire. So you can see that overextension is a connection to the inability to access raw materials, because if you extend too much, you are very thin, you spread very thin, your forces very thin. And if you spread your forces very thin and you do not have enough resources, it literally means the end of your involvement in the war. Okay, resources were too far. Okay, and it doesn't help that locally there are people who don't support the Japanese, and if the Japanese don't plan very well, obviously if they make mistakes, they're going to blunder. They've blundered, they will lose the war. And it doesn't help that even, this is quite interesting, there was a rivalry between both the army and navy. So imagine if your own defense system, right? Okay, your army and your navy cannot work together, then how? How are you going to fight a common enemy? So this is what I meant by overextension. It's too big. It's just too big for the Japanese, and it's not as though the Japanese were not fighting other fronts of war. USSR later will come in, the Allied powers with their island hopping strategy. So they're just spreading themselves too thin. Okay, and especially if the war in Europe is already ending or ended, then all the resources now just focus solely in Asia Pacific. The Japanese didn't stand a chance. Okay, they only sort of won the war initially because a lot of the focus was in Europe and to get rid of the Germans. Okay, so this was a bit of research that I did. There was this inter-service. Inter-service means between service. So you have the Navy here, This is the hat, and you have the army here. And I realized that, well, in your textbook just says that there is this serious fighting. It was actually because of their, like clan or the group. Okay, they are from the Choshu domain, whereas the Navy was the Satsuma. So because of this, they were historically enemies. And you just imagine if, let's say, both of them are fighting, or both of them are not sharing information or sharing strategies or help each other. Obviously, the American forces in the Pacific has an easier time. I found two videos here which you can watch later, and it says here the Imperial Japanese Army and Imperial Navy were rival feudal. Feudal means historical, okay, based on their clan forces that had suicidal hatred. To plan to say this, I mean, it really shows that they are not helping each other, and if they're not helping each other with a common enemy, they will be defeated. And when we talk about the lack of support, is because you know how the Japanese were abusing and looted resources. Okay, all these are actually YouTube examples of how the Japanese, what the Japanese did, and because of that, the Japanese had no local support. And of course, finally, the poor planning. Okay, and obviously, US, when you fight against the US has produced more times as many in terms of raw materials, oil, steel. How can you even compete, right? So, I mean, the Japanese were just fighting what we call a losing battle. Okay, so this you can take a look at this. All right, quite interesting how they portray the Japanese in the end. Okay, very interesting video that I will attach to show you General Tojo. He is, of course, the general or the military commander of World War II. Okay, and of course, finally, we need to look at the link. So again, if we talk about the weakness, you have Germany, ineffective command structure, war on two fronts. For Japan, it is the overextension of empire, inability to access raw materials. How do you link? Okay, so you can see ineffective command structure will result to make mistakes. And when you have mistakes, okay, as German kept losing, the Allied power gained more strength and eventually won. War on two fronts. By fighting a two-front war, it made German weak, obviously, right? Obviously, right? Okay, and resources needed to be divided, causing the military to be worn out. I mean, you cannot fight a two-front war and at the same time have not enough resources, or you really have to fight against the elements. In Soviet Union, it was actually the coldness. Overextension of empire. Remember Japan? Too thin, spread too thin, so resources were also too far spread out, okay, such that it was difficult to reach crucial areas, and the inability to get materials. So once US stopped important resources, it was very hard for the Japanese to continue their war efforts. Okay, so we have come to the end of chapter 6.